Tomorrow morning, you'll wish you had never done this." The words were calm, almost gentle, yet they lingered in the cool morning air with a weight that no one around the crowded sidewalk could explain. Officer Daniel Mercer paused for only half a second before letting out a mocking laugh. To him, the elderly black woman standing in front of him looked harmless, dressed in a neatly pressed pale blue cardigan, comfortable walking shoes, and a faded church hat that had clearly been cared for longer than most people kept a car. Her hands rested quietly at her sides. Her shoulders remained straight despite the growing crowd gathering outside the neighborhood pharmacy in downtown Richmond. Mercer adjusted the badge on his chest with practiced confidence, making sure everyone could see it before speaking louder than necessary. "Ma'am, you're under arrest." Gasps rippled through the people waiting nearby. Several shoppers instinctively reached for their phones, uncertain whether they were witnessing a misunderstanding or something far worse. Gloria Brooks didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She simply looked at the young officer with kind brown eyes that carried decades of patience. "Officer," she said softly, "would you please tell me what crime I've committed?" Mercer folded his arms, wearing the smug expression of a man convinced that authority alone settled every question. "You know exactly what you did." Gloria slowly shook her head. "No, sir. I truly don't." The answer seemed to irritate him even more. Around them, morning sunlight reflected off storefront windows while city buses rolled past and the smell of fresh coffee drifted from the cafe across the street. Ordinary life continued only a few feet away, yet the silence surrounding the confrontation grew heavier with every passing second. A young mother pulled her little son closer. An elderly veteran lowered the newspaper he had been reading. Two high school students exchanged uneasy glances but kept recording. Gloria noticed every face. Fear. Confusion. Embarrassment. No one stepped forward, yet no one walked away either. Mercer removed a pair of handcuffs from his belt with deliberate confidence. "Turn around." Gloria hesitated just long enough to search his face, almost as if hoping to find a trace of compassion hidden beneath the uniform. She found none. Instead of protesting, she quietly complied. The metallic click echoed louder than anyone expected. Several people looked away. Others whispered under their breath. Mercer appeared satisfied, believing the moment confirmed exactly who held the power. "This is what happens when people think the rules don't apply to them," he announced loudly enough for every phone camera to capture his words. Gloria lowered her eyes briefly before looking back at him with remarkable calm. There was no anger in her expression, only disappointment that seemed far older than the morning itself. "Young man," she said in a voice barely above a whisper, "power has a way of borrowing tomorrow from people who misuse today." Mercer smirked. "Save the speeches." She nodded politely. "I wasn't giving a speech." She glanced once toward the clear blue sky above the brick buildings before meeting his eyes again. "I was simply telling you what tomorrow will bring." Mercer escorted her toward the waiting patrol car, convinced the story ended there. Around him, camera screens continued recording every quiet step Gloria Brooks took. None of the witnesses realized they had just captured the beginning of a story that would leave an entire police department wishing the next morning had never arrived. The ride to the precinct lasted less than 15 minutes, yet Gloria Brooks spent every second looking out the window instead of at the officer sitting in front of her. The familiar streets of Richmond rolled by one after another, each carrying memories that stretched back more than half a century. She watched the bakery where she had bought birthday cakes for generations of neighborhood children, the small public library where she volunteered every Wednesday afternoon, and the brick elementary school whose playground still echoed with laughter she remembered as clearly as yesterday. Few people passing those places would have guessed that the quiet woman inside the patrol car had once taught reading to more than 2,000 children during a career that lasted nearly 40 years. To most of the city she was simply Miss Gloria. Parents trusted her. Former students stopped to hug her in grocery stores. Nurses smiled whenever she delivered homemade soup to elderly patients with no nearby family. Every Saturday morning she packed paper bags with sandwiches, fruit, and bottled water before walking 6 blocks to the Veterans Memorial, where she quietly handed them to anyone who looked hungry without asking a single question. She never posted photographs. She never asked for recognition. She believed kindness was supposed to be witnessed by the person receiving it, not by strangers on the internet. After retiring, she had turned the small home she shared with her late husband into a place where neighborhood children gathered after school to finish homework. The dining room table still carried faint scratches left by decades of pencils, crayons, and science projects. On one wall hung dozens of handwritten thank you cards, some faded by sunlight, others written only months before. Gloria never removed any of them because every note reminded her that even ordinary lives could leave extraordinary footprints. Her own children lived in different states now, calling every evening without fail, but she never complained about growing older alone. She often said that loneliness disappeared whenever someone needed help. Inside the patrol car she quietly folded her hands together, not in fear but in habit, whispering the same short prayer she had repeated before every difficult day since she became a young teacher. She asked for wisdom instead of victory and peace instead of revenge. At the precinct, a desk clerk looked up as Gloria entered and paused for a brief moment. Something about her face seemed familiar. Before he could remember where they had met, paperwork slid across the counter and routine replaced curiosity. Gloria answered every question politely, never raising her voice, never allowing frustration to shape her words. Even the employees who barely noticed the people coming through those doors sensed an unusual calm surrounding the 72-year-old woman. Meanwhile, across town, people who had witnessed the arrest continued sharing the videos they had recorded. Thousands of views became tens of thousands before lunchtime. Comments poured in from former students, church members, firefighters, nurses, military veterans, and families who all recognized the same gentle face. One after another they wrote nearly identical words. "That cannot be Miss Gloria. There has to be some mistake." Officer Daniel Mercer finished the last page of his report with the same confidence that had carried him through every questionable decision of his career. He leaned back in his chair, folded his hands behind his head, and watched the fluorescent lights reflect off the polished badge hanging from his uniform. Around the squad room, keyboards clicked steadily while phones rang without urgency. To everyone else it was another ordinary shift. To Mercer, it was another reminder that authority always won. He had learned years ago that paperwork often mattered more than truth. If a report sounded official enough, most people stopped asking difficult questions. That belief had become the foundation of his career. Younger officers admired his certainty. Some even copied the way he carried himself, speaking loudly, walking confidently, and treating every encounter like a contest that had to produce a winner. Mercer enjoyed that reputation. He believed fear created respect, and respect created control. Whenever someone questioned his judgment, he reminded them how many commendations he had received and how many years he had worn the uniform. Few challenged him twice. Yet beneath the polished image lay a habit that only a handful of coworkers quietly noticed. Mercer rarely admitted mistakes. He blamed misunderstandings on civilians, dismissed complaints as exaggerations, and laughed whenever someone suggested that community trust mattered as much as arrests. His favorite phrase echoed through the station often enough for everyone to recognize it before he finished saying it. "People remember confidence, not details." Several officers smiled politely whenever he repeated those words, although not all of them agreed. Across the room, Officer Emily Carter glanced at the incident log and frowned. She had watched enough body camera footage during her career to know that confidence and accuracy were not always the same thing. She remembered seeing the elderly woman arrive earlier that morning. There had been something unusual about her composure. Most frightened people filled the booking area with panic or anger. Gloria Brooks had filled it with quiet dignity. Even after being processed, she had thanked the clerk who handed her a cup of water. That small act lingered in Emily's thoughts far longer than she expected. Meanwhile, Mercer scrolled through social media during his coffee break. At first he smirked when he saw the first few videos from the arrest. Public attention never bothered him. In fact, he often believed publicity strengthened his position. He assumed strangers online would accept the official version of events without hesitation. But as the minutes passed, the comments beneath the videos multiplied faster than he could read them. Hundreds became thousands. Thousands became tens of thousands. Former students shared childhood photographs beside Gloria Brooks. Local pastors described years of volunteer work. Firefighters recalled meals she had prepared after devastating apartment fires. Nurses thanked her for visiting patients who had no family. Military veterans called her the kindest person they had ever met. The same sentence appeared again and again until it seemed impossible to ignore. If Miss Gloria says something happened, we believe her. Mercer stared at the screen a moment longer before locking his phone with an impatient sigh. He convinced himself that public opinion was temporary. Tomorrow, he thought, everyone would forget. He had no idea that while he was finishing his coffee, the first pieces of evidence capable of changing everything had already begun quietly making their way toward the people with the authority to investigate him. Late that afternoon, the holding area grew unusually quiet as golden sunlight filtered through the narrow windows, painting long rectangles across the polished concrete floor. Gloria Brooks sat on a simple metal bench with her hands folded neatly in her lap, her posture unchanged despite the uncertainty surrounding her. She had declined several opportunities to complain, choosing instead to thank the correctional officer who offered her a blanket when the air conditioning became too cold. Her gentle manners slowly transformed the atmosphere around her. A young woman waiting in another cell asked if she was frightened. Gloria smiled warmly before answering, "Fear visits every heart, but it does not have to stay." The words lingered in the room long after the conversation ended. Across the hall, Officer Emily Carter quietly reviewed the intake paperwork once again. Something continued to trouble her. The timeline in Daniel Mercer's report felt unusually polished, almost rehearsed. Every sentence seemed designed to remove uncertainty instead of documenting it. Years of experience had taught her that real incidents usually contained small imperfections, details that reflected confusion or human emotion. This report contained almost none. Before she could examine it further, her computer displayed an alert from the department email system. The subject line immediately caught her attention. Community video submission. Attached were several recordings captured from different angles by people standing near the pharmacy that morning. Emily hesitated only a moment before opening the first file. On the screen she watched Gloria standing calmly on the sidewalk while curious pedestrians slowed their pace. She listened carefully as every word became clearer through different microphones and different distances. Nothing about the elderly woman's voice matched the aggressive tone described in the official report. Emily opened another recording. Then another. Each perspective revealed slightly different details, but together they painted a remarkably consistent picture. Gloria remained composed. Mercer remained increasingly impatient. Emily leaned back in her chair and quietly exhaled. She knew these videos alone might not answer every question, but they raised enough concerns that ignoring them would violate everything she believed about the badge she wore. At nearly the same moment, several miles away, a small family-owned electronics repair shop prepared to close for the evening. The owner, 34-year-old Marcus Hill, recognized Gloria the instant her face appeared in a local news clip playing above the counter. His expression changed immediately. 20 years earlier, Miss Gloria had been the teacher who stayed after school every afternoon helping him overcome severe reading difficulties when other students laughed at him. She had never accepted payment. She had simply told him that every child deserved someone who believed in them before they learned to believe in themselves. Marcus looked toward the security monitor mounted above his register. His building sat directly across from the pharmacy. The cameras recorded continuously and automatically backed up every file to secure cloud storage each night. His heartbeat quickened. Without wasting another second, he opened the archive and selected the footage from that morning. As the progress bar slowly loaded across the screen, Marcus whispered the same words Gloria had once spoken to him years before. The truth is patient. Neither he nor anyone else realized that hidden inside those digital files was the missing piece capable of changing not only one investigation, but the future of everyone involved before the next sunrise. Evening settled over Richmond with slow-moving clouds painted in shades of orange and deep blue, while the city unknowingly drifted toward a moment that would change far more than a single arrest report. Inside the precinct, the usual noise faded as officers completed paperwork and prepared to end their shifts. Gloria Brooks remained remarkably peaceful. She thanked the evening officer who brought her a warm meal, smiled at the custodian mopping the hallway, and quietly asked whether his granddaughter had recovered from the flu after remembering a conversation they had shared months earlier at the community health fair. The man stopped in surprise. He had almost forgotten meeting her, but she had remembered both his face and his family. As he walked away, he shook his head in quiet disbelief. Some people carried kindness so naturally that it seemed impossible to imagine them creating the kind of disturbance described in the official report. Across the building, Daniel Mercer finished another cup of coffee and laughed with two fellow officers about the attention the incident had received online. He insisted that social media always moved on to the next controversy within 24 hours. People forget faster than they complain, he said confidently. Tomorrow nobody will care. His words sounded convincing enough that one officer nodded, but Emily Carter remained silent. She had already forwarded the citizen videos through the proper channels, attaching a brief note requesting supervisory review because of inconsistencies between the recordings and the written narrative. She did not accuse anyone. She simply asked that the evidence be examined before any final decisions were made. Meanwhile, Marcus Hill sat alone inside his electronics shop with only the glow of multiple computer monitors lighting the room. The security archive had finally finished processing. Camera angles from the front entrance, the parking lot, and the neighboring storefront synchronized automatically into one continuous timeline. Marcus watched carefully, frame by frame, refusing to rush. He enlarged the image, adjusted the brightness, and replayed several moments that ordinary viewers might have ignored. Then he noticed something that caused him to freeze. Before the encounter had escalated, Gloria had politely pointed toward a receipt lying near the pharmacy entrance and appeared to explain that it belonged to another customer. Moments later, the customer returned, thanked her, and walked away smiling. The interaction lasted only seconds, yet it revealed the calm and helpful behavior she displayed immediately before Mercer approached. Marcus continued watching. Every minute added another layer of context missing from the official account. Nothing suggested hostility. Nothing suggested disorderly conduct. Instead, the recordings showed a woman behaving exactly as everyone in Richmond had always known her to behave. Marcus carefully exported the complete footage along with the original timestamps preserved by the cloud backup system. He uploaded duplicate copies to secure storage, then drafted a detailed email address to Internal Affairs, the Office of the Commonwealth's Attorney, and the Civilian Police Oversight Board. Before pressing send, he paused only long enough to look at an old class photograph hanging beside his desk. There stood Miss Gloria in the center, surrounded by smiling fourth graders from nearly 20 years earlier. Marcus smiled softly and whispered, "You taught us that doing the right thing is usually hardest right before it matters most." He clicked send. Within seconds the files began arriving in government inboxes across the city while Daniel Mercer rested comfortably, completely unaware that the clock was no longer counting down to another ordinary morning. It was counting down to the moment the truth would arrive before he did. Night slowly surrendered to dawn as the city rested beneath a pale blue sky, and for a few quiet hours the streets of Richmond seemed untouched by the storm that was quietly gathering behind office doors and computer screens. Inside the precinct, the fluorescent lights hummed softly while most of the building remained unusually still. Gloria Brooks sat awake before sunrise, wrapped in the simple blanket she had been given the evening before. She had barely slept, yet there were no signs of bitterness on her face. Instead, she watched the first rays of morning light slip through the narrow window, stretching across the floor until they reached the tips of her shoes. The warmth reminded her of mornings spent opening her classroom decades earlier, unlocking the door before sunrise so children who arrived early would always have a safe place to wait. She closed her eyes for a moment and whispered another quiet prayer, not asking for rescue but for wisdom to accept whatever the day would bring. Across the hall, an officer beginning the morning shift paused outside her room. He had heard the stories circulating online throughout the night and found himself studying the elderly woman with quiet curiosity. She greeted him with a gentle smile and wished him a safe shift before he even introduced himself. The officer hesitated, surprised that someone facing such uncertainty would think first about another person's well-being. He nodded politely and continued walking, but her words remained with him long after he disappeared around the corner. Outside, the city slowly awakened. Delivery trucks rolled through downtown streets. Fresh bread filled the air outside neighborhood bakeries. Church bells echoed softly across old brick buildings while early commuters carried coffee cups through the cool morning breeze. Life appeared ordinary, yet unseen messages continued moving through secure networks inside government offices. Internal Affairs investigators opened Marcus Hill's email just after 7 o'clock. One investigator watched the synchronized recordings once without speaking. Then he watched them again. Another investigator compared the footage with Daniel Mercer's written report line by line. Every passing minute revealed another inconsistency that demanded explanation. Meanwhile, Officer Emily Carter arrived earlier than usual and found several supervisors gathered quietly inside a conference room with serious expressions. No voices were raised. No accusations filled the room. Only the repeated sound of video playback echoed from a large monitor. Emily immediately recognized the footage she had requested be reviewed, now accompanied by additional camera angles she had never seen before. The timeline fit together with remarkable precision, leaving almost no unanswered questions. In another part of the building, Daniel Mercer walked through the front entrance carrying his usual cup of coffee, greeting coworkers with the same confidence he displayed every morning. He noticed conversations becoming unusually quiet as he passed but dismissed the change as simple curiosity surrounding yesterday's headlines. He smiled to himself, believing another routine shift was about to begin. He never imagined that before he had even reached his desk, multiple supervisors had already been instructed not to assign him to patrol until a formal review could take place. At that same moment, Gloria remained seated peacefully beneath the growing morning light, unaware that events beyond her sight had already begun shifting in her favor. She simply watched the sunlight grow brighter across the floor and remembered something she had told hundreds of children over the years. Darkness always believes it has won until morning quietly arrives. Daniel Mercer had barely set his coffee on the corner of his desk when a uniformed lieutenant appeared beside him with an expression that carried none of the casual familiarity of an ordinary morning. "Officer Mercer, the captain needs to see you immediately." The words were calm, almost routine, yet every nearby conversation seemed to disappear at once. Mercer looked around the squad room, expecting someone to smile or make a joke, but no one did. He straightened his uniform, convinced this meeting would simply be another discussion about the attention surrounding yesterday's arrest. He even carried his coffee with him as he walked down the hallway, his polished shoes echoing against the tile floor. Inside the conference room, the atmosphere felt entirely different. The blinds were partially closed, soft morning light slipping through narrow openings across a long wooden table. 3 supervisors sat waiting alongside 2 investigators from Internal Affairs. A large monitor glowed silently on the wall. Mercer noticed a folder resting in front of every person except himself. The captain gestured toward the empty chair. "Please have a seat." Mercer smiled politely, still projecting confidence. "I figured this was about the videos online." The captain nodded once without returning the smile. "It is about the videos, but not the way you think." One of the investigators pressed a button on the remote. The monitor came to life. First came the citizen recordings Emily Carter had already reviewed. Then another angle appeared from across the street. Then another. Finally, the synchronized security footage from Marcus Hill's building filled the screen in remarkable clarity. Every camera displayed the same timeline from different perspectives. The room remained silent except for the recorded sounds of passing traffic, morning conversations, and Gloria Brooks speaking with the quiet courtesy that had become familiar to everyone who watched the footage. Mercer leaned forward slightly. The confidence in his expression began to soften. The investigators paused the recording several times, comparing exact timestamps with the statements contained in his official report. Each pause highlighted another difference. Another detail that did not match. Another claim unsupported by the recordings. No one raised a voice. No one accused him dramatically. The evidence spoke with complete patience. Emily Carter sat quietly near the end of the table, watching not with satisfaction but with disappointment. She had hoped there would be an explanation that restored everyone's confidence. Instead, every minute of footage made that possibility smaller. The captain finally folded his hands together. Officer Mercer, before we continue, do you have any additional information you wish to provide that might help explain these discrepancies? Mercer looked from one face to another. For the first time in years, he discovered that confidence alone could not answer a simple question supported by undeniable evidence. His coffee had grown cold beside him, untouched. Across the building, a correctional officer unlocked the holding room where Gloria Brooks waited. He smiled respectfully before speaking. Miss Brooks, there has been a development. Someone would like to speak with you. Gloria slowly stood, smoothing the sleeves of her cardigan exactly as she had done before entering thousands of classrooms throughout her life. She thanked the officer with the same quiet grace she had shown every person she met since yesterday morning. As she stepped into the hallway, sunlight poured through the front windows of the precinct, brighter now than it had been at dawn, and for the first time since her arrest, the weight inside the building had begun to shift away from the woman who had patiently trusted the truth to find its own voice. The conference room remained silent long after the final recording ended. No one reached for the remote. No one hurried to fill the stillness with explanations. The evidence had already done what raised voices never could. Daniel Mercer stared at the dark screen, his reflection faintly visible against the glass, while every confident assumption he had carried into the room slowly dissolved. The captain closed the folder in front of him with measured care before speaking. Officer Mercer, effective immediately, you are being relieved of active duty pending the outcome of a formal investigation. The words were delivered without anger, yet they carried a finality that everyone present understood. Mercer opened his mouth as though searching for an argument, but every explanation seemed smaller than the recordings that had just been reviewed. Across the table, Emily Carter lowered her eyes for a brief moment. She felt no satisfaction. Accountability was necessary, but watching trust break apart was never something to celebrate. At nearly the same time, Gloria Brooks was escorted into a quiet administrative office instead of back to the holding area. Warm sunlight poured through the large windows, softening the room with gentle morning light. The police chief entered a few moments later without an entourage, removed his service cap, and stood before her in respectful silence. Gloria rose to greet him exactly as she had greeted every visitor who had ever entered her classroom. The chief spoke carefully, choosing every word. Miss Brooks, after reviewing new evidence, it is clear that serious questions have been raised about yesterday's events. You are free to leave immediately, and I want to personally apologize for what you experienced while in our custody. Gloria listened quietly, her expression unchanged. She did not interrupt. When he finished, she simply nodded once. Thank you for telling me the truth, she replied gently. The truth deserves respect, even when it arrives later than we hoped. The chief looked at her with visible regret. Many people would be angry. Gloria smiled with the same warmth that had comforted frightened children for decades. Anger may satisfy a moment, Chief, but it rarely heals one. Her answer lingered in the room, leaving no space for easy replies. Outside the precinct, word spread quickly that Gloria had been released. Neighbors gathered along the sidewalk, not because anyone had organized them, but because gratitude often traveled faster than invitations. Teachers who had once worked beside her stood shoulder to shoulder with former students now grown into doctors, mechanics, firefighters, business owners, and parents raising children of their own. Marcus Hill waited quietly near the entrance, remembering the patient teacher who had refused to let a struggling fourth grader believe he was incapable of learning. When Gloria stepped through the front doors, the crowd did not erupt into cheers. Instead, hats were removed, conversation stopped, and an almost reverent silence settled across the sidewalk. One by one, people approached to shake her hand or embrace her gently. Several thanked her for believing in them years before they believed in themselves. Gloria accepted every greeting with humility, reminding each person that kindness was never something one person owned. As she looked across the familiar faces gathered beneath the bright Virginia sky, she realized that the greatest answer to injustice had never been revenge. It was a lifetime of quiet goodness returning when it was needed most, carried in the hearts of people whose lives had been changed long before this difficult day had ever begun. Several weeks passed, and the headlines that had once filled television screens slowly disappeared, replaced by newer stories and newer debates. But in one corner of Richmond, the events of that unforgettable morning continued to shape quiet lives in ways cameras would never capture. The formal investigation moved forward through the proper legal process, while the department announced new training, stronger evidence review procedures, and expanded community oversight. For many people, those changes sounded like policy. For Gloria Brooks, they represented something much simpler. Someone had finally chosen to listen before deciding. She returned to her familiar routine without seeking interviews or public recognition. Every Wednesday afternoon, she unlocked the doors of the neighborhood library exactly as she always had. Every Saturday morning, she packed sandwiches, fruit, and bottled water into paper bags before walking to the Veterans Memorial. The children gathered once again around her dining room table after school, filling the old house with laughter, sharpened pencils, and unfinished homework. It was almost as though life had gently folded back into its proper place. One crisp autumn afternoon, Marcus Hill arrived carrying a brand new bookshelf for Gloria's tutoring room. He refused payment, smiling as he assembled it beside the window where sunlight filled the room with warmth. Before leaving, he quietly slipped an envelope onto the table. Inside were handwritten letters from dozens of former students who had recognized Gloria in the news. Teachers, nurses, engineers, police officers, military veterans, and young parents had each written a few simple lines describing how one patient teacher had changed the direction of their lives decades earlier. Gloria read every letter slowly, pausing often as familiar names brought back faces she had not seen in years. Tiny tears gathered in her eyes, not because of what had happened at the precinct, but because kindness she had almost forgotten giving had somehow found its way home. A few days later, Officer Emily Carter stopped by after finishing her shift. She was not wearing her uniform jacket, only a simple blue shirt beneath it. She stood quietly on the front porch until Gloria opened the door with the same welcoming smile she offered every visitor. Emily hesitated before speaking. "I wanted to thank you," she said softly. Gloria looked surprised. "For what, dear?" Emily smiled. "For reminding me that wearing a badge is not the same as earning trust." Gloria reached out and gently squeezed her hand. "Then promise me something." Emily nodded. "Whenever you have authority over another person, remember that dignity is never yours to give or take away. It already belongs to them." Emily carried those words with her long after she walked back to her patrol car. As the afternoon sun settled behind the old maple trees lining Gloria's quiet street, a little girl riding her bicycle stopped in front of the house and looked up with innocent curiosity. "Miss Gloria," she asked, "how do you stay kind after someone treats you unfairly?" Gloria glanced toward the golden light dancing across the sidewalk before answering with the peaceful certainty of someone who had spent a lifetime teaching far more than reading and writing. Because kindness is not something another person controls, she said. If I let someone else's bitterness steal mine, then they would have taken far more than one difficult day. The little girl smiled, nodded thoughtfully, and pedaled away beneath the glowing evening sky while Gloria remained on her porch, watching the breeze carry fallen leaves across the quiet street, knowing that justice had restored her name, but kindness had protected her heart all along.